The atoll of Bikini is a group of tiny South Sea islands that have been atom-bombed more than anywhere else on Earth in cold blood. Here, long before the world understood what the atom bomb was, I saw it explode twice. Now it's 1969, 23 years after that mad expedition named so neatly and ominously Operation Crossroads, and the Americans have at last allowed me to return. What an extraordinary journey that had been in 1946. Out of the 40,000 people assembled for the operation, the Americans had given places for a few outsiders: France, Mexico, Canada, Poland, and China. And since she too, in those dreamy days, was technically an ally, Russia. And Britain, which was me, flying across the world from India to join this wild circus in the South Seas. Not one of us knew whether the whole thing was reason or folly, for we didn't know what lay ahead. Sometimes we were told we were going to blow a hole in the sky. Sometimes we were told that we were going to defend civilization, and sometimes that we were going to knock its block off. That journey endured in my mind longer, I think, than anything else. I always knew that one day it would have to be done again. And now it is being done again. They've stopped testing bombs on Bikini now. There have been none since 1958. But in those years, that little fly speck of an island suffered 23 nuclear experiments and rocked under more explosive power than has ever been used in the entire history of human warfare. Now the Americans who blew Bikini to bits are working to restore it so that life can start again. How strange people are, so zealous to redeem what they so zealously destroy. A hemisphere away is Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii, next door as it happens to Pearl Harbor. These people will take me off to Atom Bomb Island. I'm returning to Bikini. I must constantly remind myself that this is today, this is 1969. I'm a middle-aged gentleman in pursuit of purely private ghosts. But there is nobody else who has done this peculiar journey twice. Will anybody else remember what Bikini was when it was the somber suicide symbol of our generation? "23 years ago, there were hundreds of us. Now, 2 or 3 agency reporters and, in a very strange irony indeed, some newsmen from, of all places, Japan. They at least know about the bomb. This whole journey has been obsessed with time. There's the 12 hours that have somehow got subtracted from life since we left London when 2 days ago, yes, 2 days ago. There's the 23 years that have passed since I last did this journey. And now, just at this very minute, we're moving into a kind of a yesterday, and not metaphorically, but actually, because we're rapidly approaching the international date line, that curious frontier between today and tomorrow, that no man's land of time where the clocks and the calendars get bent, and it's coming up any moment now. It's now 9 o'clock on Wednesday. And now it's all over. It's 9 o'clock on Thursday. It's the most extraordinary thing, because 24 hours have just jumped out of life. A whole day has been abolished and vanished. And I could have done with that day too. So now all I can do is go back even further, to go back 8,000 days to that summer when Bikini really was the punctuation mark of this century. At dawn, Bikini came up under the port wing in the operatic Pacific sunrise, this fleck of Coral Island that was somehow drawn into the orbit of nuclear history. I remember very well. That old B-29 was called Dave's Dream. I never asked why. So did I see my first atom bomb, dropped from Dave's Dream to explode 1,000 feet above those ships in the lagoon. But it was not my last. There was another one to come. By and by, they were to explode the second, buried in the waters of the lagoon itself. That I also saw. And then, as the years went on, more and more and more. But those I did not see, for I never went back. Not until today. And today, that fabulous sunrise in the clouds could have held the spectres of all those bombs. All gone now. What more can happen to Bikini after all those thundering years? Now, down here, on the loneliest spot in the world, Big Brother is cleaning up. It's America's responsibility. After the war, the United Nations ordained that Bikini should be United States Trust territory. Predictable, corny, sentimentality. There was a guided trip round the island, but I didn't particularly want to go.
This is our directional antenna. We have very good communications with Honolulu.
This is one of the most awful pictures in the world, for that little black thing on the right is the battleship Arkansas, taking off vertically like a rocket and never to be seen again. I don't know why I carried those old photographs back all the way from London to where they'd been taken in that 1,000th of a second in 1946. It's a way of carrying one's memory around, I suppose, to prove that it really did happen. I don't know why I got impatient. I wanted to say, damn it, this is Bikini. Could be the crucible of your destiny. But why, in honesty, should an agency man give a damn about this more than anything else? And yet some of them are Japanese. This is harder to understand. In Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the population was not asked to leave first. The Japanese, like the Americans, are strange people. Very different, but equally strange. How could they come back here?
And then clean them out and leave them there. The landowners that were here with the first group of Bikinians were very pleased to find that they had bunkers on their land. Many of them, when they got here, they immediately went to the piece of property that their family owned, and they found a nice bunker on it. They were all smiles. This is a compost pit. In clearing out this area, we had to pick up quite a bit of brush.
In a funny sort of way, it's as though people had chosen a really pleasant place to show off the most unpleasant thing they make, the atom bomb, and thus destroyed the pleasant place. And then, when they've no more use for it at all, they get a conscience about it and try and kiss it better in a clumsy sort of way. As though you'd brushed off a child and hurt it because you were too busy, and then got penitent about it and gave it a toy. Except that in this case, the toy was their own anyhow. This was their home. And I'm sure it's not going to be ever the same, no matter how many expensive, awful bunkers they're left as their tip. You walk through the scrub and the underbrush of the island, and you suddenly come on this. It's pretty ugly, isn't it? But in fact, it's not really ugly enough. It ought to be dark and somber and menacing, not a yellow old shed. Because this is, or was, the assembly building. Assembly meaning nuclear weapons. This was where they put the things together before they loaded them on barges and took them away to where they were exploded. And that's all it is. While almost everything agreeable in the neighborhood was blown to pieces, this wasn't. And so it's going to be given as a present to the returning islanders. I wonder what the Bikinians will do with a nuclear assembly building. They call this derelict place Camp Blandy. Admiral Blandy was my commander of the Operation Crossroads in 1946. But it does remind me very, very much indeed of another little place up the atoll a mile or two. which was just a shack like this, but it did rate as an officer's shore establishment, and therefore it had a bar. And after weeks and weeks on an American naval ship, you know they're bone dry, not a drop. But it was a very welcome sight indeed, even though they'd chosen to call it the Up and Atom Bar. Gosh, it was a very funny bar too, and the management had the most unusual attitude, which I suppose is understandable, since they knew that at 8 o'clock the next morning their whole premises were going to be blown to smithereens. They weren't too fussy about the stock taking. In fact, the drinks got cheaper and cheaper as the evening went on, until in the end they were costing nothing at all, as far as I can recall, which isn't all that far. But have you ever thought of a hangover at daybreak the next day, when all you're waiting for is an atom bomb to go off in your ears? That was a hangover that lasted 23 years. Well, these days, really not bad little breakers coming up here, but they're, I suppose, about 3 feet. Well, the one after the submarine explosion out in the lagoon here, it came up to about 320 feet, I imagine. Can you imagine a wave coming along as high as one of the highest buildings you've ever seen? I mean, that is a sort of terrifying nightmare thing. But that, I suppose, it's just a big wave. I mean, it's a much more imponderable thing than that.
But no, but I mean, I've not met a single person on this island who is particularly aware of its significance anyway, in terms of history.
I mean, you can't ask people to go around moralizing about every job they have to do. Can't be done.
Well, you do.
I know I do, and I shouldn't do, but I know I do, and I have to stop myself doing it. I keep thinking everybody ought to be going around with mourning on or something, and tears rolling down their cheeks saying, alas a day, what have we done? All they're doing, they're being paid a hell of a lot of dough in order to do a straightforward job of reconstitution. They are themselves surrounding it with a bit of moralizing that I find a little silly. But we will give them back this, and we will give them back that, simply because it's far too much trouble to take it away. And so that is their fault, not mine. But I mean, one cannot. I've been obsessed with this bomb for so long. I'm not as obsessed myself as much as I was before.
Has in some way coming back, has that helped you to sort of exorcise?
Oh yes, very much so. At the same time, I still have to keep on bringing myself to remember that the thing I saw, and that terrified me out of my wits, was a trifling thing compared to what is now available, you see. It is as though I think somebody who'd seen the first crossbow and said, you know, this is intolerable. One cannot, we must have a committee for the abolition of the crossbow or something. Then somebody comes up and says, no, we've got the arquebus or the flintlock or something.
But how could you come to terms with this?
Oh, I could come to terms with the atom bomb so long as somebody else was the exclusive owner of it. Well, what angers me, and I'm not an American, I'm not a Russian, I'm not a Chinese, but I am British, and we play around in the shallows of this nuclear game, and that is what angers me. I mean, I would still detest the atom bomb no matter who owned it. But what does particularly exasperate me is the futility of us lending ourselves to it at all in a way that's both futile and undignified, it seems to me. It was a terrible, frightening thing to see, but I knew it was going to be that. In fact, I was much more frightened before it than I was after it.
At what point?
Well, like everybody else, it was excruciatingly tense until it went off. Then it went off and suddenly you were still alive. And one was right in the middle of this tremendous titanic lake of water, the biggest area it is possible to conceive of. And the atom bomb had gone off right in the middle of it, and all that one felt was, and here's the Pacific just going on precisely as before. I knew it wasn't going on precisely precisely as before. That is the terrifying thing, but it looked as though it were. We were in no position to know the frightful and terrible things that had happened inside the water and in the atmosphere all around. But there was no physical evidence of that until later. One did physically with one's own eyes see that an atom bomb dropped on top of a fleet of 79 ships in the harbour did not cause them to vanish, as we had thought. And even though every one of those ships 5 minutes later had been crewed by corpses or maniacs, nonetheless it didn't look so terrible. And this was where a great many people, I think, fell into error. Because after all, the bomb that I saw was the size of bomb that is now used as the detonator for the real bomb. My God, it's good enough for me then.
The trip is over. In the late afternoon sun, the repair workers, Americans, Kanakas, Chinese, even a few Bikinians, have a party. There have been many good parties on Bikini, and there'll be many more. Nature somehow survives almost anything. Things go on, they insist on growing. They get twisted maybe, genetically deformed maybe, but they insist on enduring. Or sometimes, like the coconut crab, they transcend it all, full of radioactivity as they continue to be. This is the truly sorrowful thing about the atomic age. The only thing you can really destroy is people. It might have been aesthetically better if Bikini had vanished from the face of the earth. But perhaps it, of all places, never will. Is it a better world since Bikini? Some say it's at least more manageable. But before Bikini, there was Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when we atomized a community and stunned a nation into surrender, well knowing in high places that that nation had already sued for peace. We just had to see what the bomb would do to people, because that's what politics are made of. Bikini was an afterthought. Nobody died on Bikini. They were taken to safety. But something died there, and that was the last of human innocence, and the last excuse to say, we didn't know.